Hi, I'm Chap Bettis, author of The Disciple Making Parent, and this is my audio blog, where I read some of my blog posts in audio format for your convenience. Well, in today's episode, we're going to be thinking about the lavish father and his two prodigal sons. I had the privilege of preaching at my church this morning on Luke 15 and the story of the prodigal son. Only it's not the story of the prodigal son, but the story of the lavish father and his two wayward sons. The main point of the sermon was that God's lavish love is meant to lead us to ongoing repentance. So the outline's really talking about the young brother's self-indulgence, the father's lavish and scandalous love, and the older brother's self-righteousness. And we conclude with the rather shocking conclusion to the end of the story. You can find a link in this podcast and this blog post in the show notes here. Well, what are some lessons that we can learn if you're a parent of a prodigal, or really for all parents? I came away with 7. So let's think about 7 lessons for parents of prodigals and really all parents. Number 1, the father loved his sons in a lavish and scandalous way. Though we focus on the sons, all 3 parables in that chapter, Luke 15, are meant to show us the love of God seeking sinners. His love was so great that it exposed him to scandal. You can listen in at about 26 minutes of the sermon to hear that scandal. If God allows prodigals in our lives, in our families, it's a chance for us to understand more deeply the love of God and grow in that lavish, self-sacrificial love ourselves. So number 1, the father loved his sons in a lavish and really even scandalous way. Number 2, the father endured great pain and shame. The father would have had to liquidate some of his holdings. Furthermore, the younger son was essentially saying, "I wish you were dead." And rather than rebuking him and disowning him, the father loved him anyway. Similarly, parents of prodigals often have to endure relational pain inflicted by the child and feelings of shame from the Christian community. Lavish love endures that pain and that shame. Number 2, the father endured great pain and shame. Number 3, the father endured great pain and shame with the older brother. No, that's not a typo. The end of the story shows that the father had been living with a rebellious older son whose relationship was not filled with love. His body was at home, but his heart was not. It had turned in bitterness against the father. So when the older son makes a scene and shames the father at his own party, the father still goes out seeking the elder son. The rebellious child in the home presents the same kind of pain. It's a different type of pain than the prodigal who leaves. What about the prodigal who stays? So number 3, the father endures great pain and shame with the older son. Number 4, the father does not grow bitter. Rather than thinking about how he's been sinned against, we see the continued love of the father. Like Joseph, he's forgiven the sin, even though the physical distance is great. Based on all the sacrifices we make for our children, it's easy to grow bitter or depressed if they turn away. Joseph could say, quote, "What you intended for evil, God intended for good." That's found in Genesis 50, verse 20. May we also, as parents of prodigals, hold on to that promise as well. What you intend for evil, God intends for good. So number 4, the father does not grow bitter. Number 5, the father did not cause the waywardness. Though not stated directly, it's certainly implied. How could a man who has the previous characteristics have caused the waywardness of the 2 sons? Many times, parents of prodigals live under the guilt of, what if? What if? We're commanded not to exasperate or embitter our children, and yet, having done our best, we're not ultimately responsible for their choices. We influence, but we do not control. So number 5, the father did not cause the waywardness. Number 6, the father prayed in faith. Again, this is not stated directly, but I wonder, how did the father see his son coming from a long way off? Well, it seems the answer is obvious. He was praying up on his roof, his flat roof. Rather than accepting the situation, he was seeking God's face. Parents of prodigals, knowing the love of God and His sovereign control, should we be, quote, up on the roof, seeking God in prayer? Number 6, the father prayed in faith. And finally, number 7, the father did not give up. I wonder how many times the father climbed the roof to pray. How many times did he release his sons to the Lord? Though he must go about his day, his heart was out seeking them. In Luke 15, in the 2 previous stories, the shepherd and the woman are out actively seeking their lost item. So perhaps, even though the father's body was not out seeking them, I think his heart and his prayers were. Like Job, he fulfilled his fatherly, priestly duty of prayer. Those are 7 lessons for parents of prodigals, or really all parents. Loving in a lavish way, enduring great pain and shame, not growing bitter, not causing the waywardness, praying and not giving up, praying in faith. Well, if you would like to listen to the whole sermon, you can find it in my other podcast all the way back at episode 10 with the same title, The Lavish Father, The Prodigal Sons, and My Family. Thank you for listening to the Disciple Making Parent audio blog. Visit our website to find more resources for the family at thedisciplemakingparent.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider telling someone else about the show. And please consider leaving us a rating or review. Believe it or not, both of those small things help us a lot. They'll help others find our show. Thanks for listening.